In exercise 101, we're going to be looking at graphs. Now, most of these are very familiar to you, and so I'll just rush through this quite quickly because I don't think you need a great explanation of these graphs that you've been looking at for quite a few years. However, the most significant information to help interpret a graph is the title, so please be aware of the title, please read the title. Our feedback from the markers is that students don't read the information correctly, and some students, that's just in general, answering a question, and some students don't bother with the title of the graph at all. Equally as important as the title is the label on each axis. And we also know the scale, the label and scale on each axis are also really important. Also need to point out that up until this new syllabus, and your course is called Standard Maths, replacing the previous General Maths course, and possibly in stage 5, you referred to this graph here as a column graph because these are columns. You will now hear it referred to as a bar graph or a bar chart. We come across it in the next exercise we're going to look at, which is 105, constructing graphs. And there you will see it definitely referred to as a bar chart. Please note that in your notes that yes, it is a column graph, but it's going to be referred to in this course as a bar chart. We will also then look at divided bar graphs, line graphs and sector graphs or pie charts. Their names haven't changed. So with a column graph, you know that the most important thing to look at is the heading. So this is internet song downloads. And the important information is that this axis represents the number of songs that were downloaded. The scale here is 10, 20, 30, 40, 50. That's nice and easy. Each little increment represents 10 songs. Across the base is the months. So over January, over February, March, April, May, June, July, etc. Column graphs are very good, as you can see, because the month is categorical data, belongs to a category, it's got a name. And I'm sure you've seen bar graphs that can also display data here that is a number. In this exercise, you will mostly just be reading information from these graphs, interpreting the information out of the graphs. I'm going to go through these examples with you in class. I won't go through them now. That doesn't mean that you can't attempt some of the questions from the exercise or can't even attempt these yourself. You might choose to fill these out, and if you're a little bit hesitant about or unsure about your answers, then you might just do them in pencil. That's fine. And I will go through them with you in class though. Let's move on. Sector graph. Now, I'll be very surprised if you haven't come across a sector graph before. Again, the most important feature is to look at the title. So this sector graph is about Australian students studying overseas. We don't have axes, we just have sectors. Now, as we can see, interpreting the title, Australian students overseas, we clearly would expect the names of other countries, these overseas countries. So we've got 6% of our students currently studying in Canada, 4 in Germany, 28 in New Zealand, etc. These percentages will add to 100%, obviously, because we've covered all the sectors in the circle. The other important thing about a sector, and I'm sure you know this, is that The angles at the centre all add up to 360 degrees. So if we were wondering what size this angle was for the UK, we'd be working out 16% of 360 degrees, and we would do that calculation and we'd work out the size of the angle needed for the UK. Now, that is by far the most common sort of question you get. You rarely get asked to construct these, because even in the real world, people are not sitting physically constructing it. They're putting their information into a spreadsheet and they're getting the spreadsheet to produce the sector graph. So it's not so much about producing them, but as the title of this exercise says, it's interpreting the information in the graph. And that's about it for sector graph. And again, I'll go through and answer these questions with you in class. Let's move on to the next graph. This next graph is called a divided bar graph. Don't confuse it with the bar chart, I think they're calling it, which is the column graph. This is a divided bar graph. Please note the name is divided bar. We're going to divide up one bar. I would always strongly encourage students, if you have to construct one of these, which again would be unlikely, but because it is just one bar, it's not as difficult or as complicated to construct as the other graphs, that you always make your bar, always mandatory, make your bar, sorry about that. You always make your bar 10 centimetres, and obviously you need a ruler. Why 10 centimetres? Because 10 centimetres is 100 millimetres. 100 is such a convenient number, especially if our data is presented as a percentage. Again, 100% fills the entire bar. If you can then break up your data into percentages, if we can work out what percentage, for example, this bar graph's about transport used to go to work. If we can work out what percentage of the people who were surveyed catch the train, then we can convert our percentage straight to millimetres and measure off. And likewise, if we have to interpret this graph, we take our ruler and we measure the number. First of all, we measure the number of millimetres here, and then we convert that straight to percentage. So a divided bar graph is quite simple once you understand the way it's constructed. And again, I'll answer the questions about this divided bar graph with you in class. The last sort of graph we're going to look at there, and please fill these out. I'm sure that for some of you that hadn't been filling out your key points and your summaries for every individual exercise, that it became quite a chore to put together a chapter summary. So a chapter, you'll need a summary at the end of chapter 1. You can make putting that summary together a whole lot easier by noting key points for every exercise. Break the task down into smaller pieces of work, and that will help you to construct your chapter summary at the end. I'm going to ask you to do all of exercise 101.